From geography to history, plants and animals, science, and so much more. This is Mike Butler, and welcome to This Day's Trivia from Bison Podcasts. Each episode, we dive into 5 unique trivia topics, all tied to today's date. And our trusty randomizer wheel will pick one of those topics for the episode. Get ready for 16 fast-paced trivia questions with just 5 seconds between each question. Perfect for testing your knowledge solo or with friends and family, at home or on your next road trip. So buckle up. It's time for this day's trivia. Today is November 25th. Get out your pen and paper to tally up your score. It's time for this day's trivia. Here we go. Topic number 1. Today is National Parfait Day in the United States. A layered dessert in a tall glass here in the US, often with ice cream or yogurt, fruit, or granola. The term comes from the French word for perfect. Parfaits are not always perfect, but can be quite nutritious if you can avoid adding chocolate chips and use yogurt instead of ice cream. Topic number 2, November 25th is White Ribbon Day, raising awareness about preventing gender-based violence. The White Ribbon organization encourages men and boys to be allies and stand with the women and girls in their lives against gender violence. This year, White Ribbon is encouraging men to hold themselves accountable to women and to each other to effect positive behavioral change and transform harmful cultures of male dominance. Topic number 3, it's Teachers' Day in Indonesia. This year, the country is trying to push what they call the independent learning movement, which has been applied in more than 80% of educational units in the country. Designed to promote autonomous learning, independent learning is geared towards equipping students with life skills to help them and their country compete globally, and promotes off-campus experience and options to pursue different pathways for acquiring knowledge and skills. Topic 4, Fidel Castro died on this day in 2016. The leader of Cuba from 1959 to 2008, he transformed the country into the first communist state in the Western Hemisphere after overthrowing the government of President Batista. He remained a controversial figure throughout his life, celebrated by some and hated by others. Topic number 5, November 25th marks the death date of Japanese writer Mishima Yukio, dying by seppuku or harakiri in 1970. A prolific writer in his day, often regarded as the most important Japanese novelist of the 20th century. Perhaps best known for his 4-volume epic The Sea of Fertility, set in Japan covering the period from about 1912 to the 1960s, each volume depicting a different reincarnation of the same being. Today's topic will be Fidel Castro. Get out your beret and join the revolution. It's time for 16 questions about Fidel Alejandro Castro Ruz, aka Fidel Castro, which is the anglicized version I'm going to be using today, simply because I have to say his name a lot in this episode. Question number 1. Fidel's father, Angel, was an immigrant to Cuba from what country in southwestern Europe? Answer: Spain. He was a successful sugarcane farmer in Cuba. Question 2. Fidel attended high school in what famous Cuban capital city? Answer: Havana. Question 3. In school, Fidel was quite the sportsman. He excelled in track and field, baseball, basketball, and what indoor game, named and fashioned after a popular outdoor sport played with paddles and a table divided by a net? Answer: table tennis. And if you don't think table tennis is a real sport, think again. It's one of the sports played in the Olympic Games, including by players from Cuba. Question 4. Castro's main interest at university was politics. In 1947, he joined an attempted invasion of what country in order to overthrow General Rafael Trujillo? I'll give you a hint. The only land that stands between the island of Cuba and this country is Haiti. Answer: the Dominican Republic. He and his comrades were not successful. Trujillo continued to have dictatorial control over the Dominican Republic until his death in 1961. Question 5. The next year, 1948, Castro traveled south. Farther this time to participate in riots happening in what capital city of the South American country of Colombia? Answer: Bogota. Known as the Bogotazo, riots broke out in the streets that year in response to the murder of populist liberal presidential candidate Jorge Gaitan. The riots left 3,000 people dead and kicked off a period of Colombia's history known as La Violencia, during which hundreds of thousands of Colombians would die. Question 6. In the early 50s, Castro became involved in Cuba's political system. However, in 1953, we saw the rise of dictatorial control at the hands of General Batista. Castro organized a rebel force practically right away. After more failed attempts to overthrow his own government this time, Fidel and his brother Raúl traveled to this country to continue plotting the overthrow of Batista. Here's a hint: they traveled west this time. Travel due west of Cuba, and it's the only country you'll hit in the Americas. Answer: Mexico. Cuba is actually quite close to Mexico, with only roughly 120 miles or 193 kilometers between western Cuba and the city of Cancun. Question 7. As mentioned, Castro became leader of Cuba in 1959. But at what age? Was he in his early 50s, early 40s, or early 30s? Answer: he was in his early 30s. He was born in Biran, Cuba, in 1926. I'm already past my mid-30s, and I haven't started any revolutions. I better get my butt in gear. Question 8. On December 2nd, 1956, Castro, along with 81 other men, landed on the eastern coast of Cuba as an armed expedition ready to take down Batista. All of them were killed or captured, except for Fidel, his brother Raúl, 9 others not as well known, and one more man whose name is very well known. Name that Argentine revolutionary and guerrilla fighter on this important mission with the Castros. Answer: Che Guevara. Guevara played an important role in the Cuban Revolution and also became a government minister under Castro before being executed by the Bolivian army in 1967. Question 9. By 1959, Castro's guerrilla tactics proved to be effective, and Batista fled the country on January 1st, handing over power to Castro. True or false? Within this new provisional government, Castro became chief of the armed forces as well as president of Cuba. Answer: false. This one was tough. He initially only carried one of those titles. A man named Manuel Urrutia acted as president for a brief time until Urrutia was forced to resign in July of 1959. Question 10. Soon after his takeover, Castro started to alienate certain nations, including the United States. The United States government was a force that developed deep distrust of Castro's new Cuba, especially because of Cuba's 1960 trade agreement with what former communist federation and superpower? Answer: the Soviet Union, or USSR, Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. The USSR was dissolved in 1991. Question 11. The U.S. government acted swiftly to overthrow Castro. In April of 1961, the U.S. government sent thousands of Cuban exiles into Cuba secretly armed to take down Castro. They were not successful. This moment in history has come to be known as what? Here's a hint. The event in history books is named after the specific area of Cuba these armed Cuban exiles landed in. Answer: the Bay of Pigs invasion off the southwestern coast of Cuba. Question 12. In another event soon after, 1962, the Soviet Union stationed ballistic missiles in Cuba, close enough to hit U.S. soil to do serious damage to various U.S. cities if launched. Eventually, the Soviets agreed to withdraw its nuclear weapons from Cuba in exchange for the U.S. agreeing to do the same with its nuclear missiles in Turkey. What is this moment in history often referred to? Answer: the Cuban Missile Crisis, or Crisis de Octubre, October Crisis in Cuba, and the Caribbean Crisis in Russia. Many consider this event to be the closest the world ever came to full-scale nuclear war during the Cold War years. Question 13. What crop did Fidel Castro try to massively increase production of in the late 1960s, calling for a 10 million ton harvest? Answer: sugar. Question 14. Which country on the west coast of southern Africa did Fidel Castro send Cuban troops to in the 1970s to help support a left-wing government rise to power? Answer: Angola. Question 15. Fidel Castro was often photographed with what in his mouth? Answer: a cigar. Only the finest Cuban cigars, too, I assume. Question 16. Now for the tie-in round. Our last episode's topic was Spain, so here's a question connecting Spain and Castro. In 1992, despite political tensions between the two nations, Fidel Castro went to Spain and visited a remote village in the heart of Galicia for a very specific purpose: to fulfill the wish of whom? Answer: his father. If you remember, his father was from Spain, the little village of Lancara. Here's a quote from Fidel. Quote, "My father always wanted to return here. It took 60 years for me to fulfill his wish." Well, that's it. A lot to sink into about this controversial figure. I'll see you next time. How'd you do? Write into the podcast to tell us your score, or if you have any suggestions. thisdaystrivia@gmail.com. That's all we have for today, but make sure to tune in every Monday, Wednesday, Friday for new episodes and new topics. Interested in ad-free episodes, bonus content, transcripts, and my sources for deeper dives into the topics? Looking for archived material from my previous podcasts, Get the Word, and the English sessions? Go over to patreon.com/Bison Podcast Studios and give us just $1 single for all of it. Patreon.com/Bison Podcast Studios. That's patreon.com/Bison Podcast Studios. Follow us on Instagram. Just search This Day's Trivia, or Instagram.com/This Day's Trivia. Until next time, this is Mike signing off.